Do you measure your SEO success through keywords? Well, it's time then to redefine SEO, because at Nexa, we look at SEO differently. We ask you, do you want your website to be optimized for search engines? Or do you prefer to own the searches relevant to your business? If this makes sense to you, the next 45 seconds will change the way you look at SEO. At Nexa, we focus on 3 key parameters. 1. Your search engine visibility. 2. Your search engine visibility in comparison to your competitors. 3. Your organic traffic in value terms. Like charity, let analytics begin at home. Let's look at how we fare across these parameters. Nexa's visibility score is 75.1%, while our closest competitors is 33.7%, less than half. Against this, Nexa clocks 7,459 website visits a month, compared to 2,453 for the competitor, more than 3 times. And how do you equate that in hard cash? Given that the average cost per click for our industry is $7.20, that's $53,086 a month, or a whopping $637,032 a year. Money talks, and it's more eloquent with ownership rather than optimization. As for the competition, they'll end up spending more for the same visibility as us, while we can deploy that money in other areas of business and create an even bigger gap. Let's take you on this journey as we redefine SEO to search engine ownership and get you more value for your marketing investment. Nexa, a growth marketing partner.
Welcome to everyone else as well out there. I can just see some people filing in now, a few friendly, familiar faces and some newbies as well. So welcome to the Digital Growth Show, guys. Nice to have you. But I think we had a bit of technical issues right at the very beginning there. We wanted to show you this beautifully presented video, and the sound disappeared, even though we tested it religiously before.
It wasn't for the lack of preparation, that's for sure. It's
That's it.
literally technology got the better of us.
That's fine. Yeah, not a problem. I think we can definitely share that video with everyone that's kind of watching. It was basically, guys, we got a nice kind of 90 second video just to explain essentially, what we are talking about today, search engine ownership. So we wanted to frame the start of the show with that, but it's fine. It's good. I'm guessing the people that are listening on podcast are kind of confused anyway, because they're just listening and we were going to be showing them something. So let's say we're considering our podcast audience now.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, how's your week been, Andrew?
Very good. Yes, it's continued to be very busy. So the end of August, I think, was positive. So I'd say as far as what we're seeing at the market at the moment, there still seems to be a good amount of business that's happening. So I think that's a positive. And as much as obviously there's a lot of debate around all the schools going back globally, kind of back home, UK today, and obviously over next couple of days here as well, locally in the region. So I think with that in mind, it'd be interesting to see how September plays out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting times.
How's your week been?
Yeah, same actually. So yeah, got 2 kids, trying to push them back into school and trying to get them into I don't know. I mean, it's weird that they've not been to school for, I guess, 6.5 months or so.
Months, yeah.
It's a long time, and so trying to get sort of young kids into that habit again, I think does present challenges. I can testify to that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It does. I think it does present challenges.
Yeah, so it's all good though. Yeah, good to be here. And yeah, nice to see you, mate. So you're in LA at the moment, right? Looking at your background.
Yeah, that's my backdrop. Yeah, it's quite impressive. I like the way the blinds make Barsha Heights look very picturesque. is beautiful. For those of you that are familiar with Dubai, I'm currently sitting in Barsha Heights in one of our offices. So it's I'm a bit concerned about the lighting. I look quite orange today. I'm very orange, even though I'm not orange. I haven't been on the tan. It's just the lighting today.
Sure, it wasn't one of those tanning machine things gone wrong, mate.
That's it. Yeah. A very Ross moment out of Friends, just to age myself. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, pal. So shall we crack on?
Yeah, definitely. That's what people are here for. They don't want to listen about my tanning routine.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Okay, awesome. Well, look, guys, thanks for joining today. So, I guess when me and Andrew were coming up with the topic for this week's show, we were a little bit apprehensive about, going into, I guess, search engines, because it's not the sexiest topic in the world. I guess is probably the nicest way of putting it, right?
Yeah. It's very, actually, very boring. Or could be seen to be boring.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, actually, our registration numbers this week were probably amongst the highest it's been for a long, long time. And actually, yeah, there's a whole load of you who've attended today. So again, thanks for joining, guys. So Andrew, let's dive straight in. We're talking about SEO. I'm sure everyone's kind of read the preview to the show when we're talking about search engine ownership, and we'll get to that. But we're in sort of 2020, soon to be 2021, which is another topic. But why is Google still important, right? Because I mean, we're both, and I think it is fair to say that we're both kind of industry veterans now, right? I certainly look at it, and your beard sort of camouflages your age slightly, but the reality is that we are industry veterans. We've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
And why is it that even today, we can talk about Google and search engines, and not just talk about it, but actually have a kind of really strong audience of people wanting to learn more about it. What is it?
Yeah, no, I think like you said, at the beginning there, sometimes Google just isn't sexy enough anymore. So there's a lean towards some of the socials, perhaps, TikTok, and from a business perspective, and sometimes people just choose to forget or just forget the fundamentals. So I think the relevancy of Google, first and foremost is, really into just the pure stats from a revenue perspective. I think we pulled up the stats earlier on as far as 2019 earnings, versus the kind of largest social network being Facebook, which is obviously Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and some of their other activity, versus Google. And right there and then, I think you can see a stark difference with Google hitting the 162 billion in 2019, and Facebook, trailing behind with a kind of mere 70 billion, as it were. So I think just from a raw numbers perspective, I think that shows, still the relevancy of it, and that the people are there. But if you start to dive into, well, okay, what is it? And it's something that I think how Google has evolved. We basically, this is something that you and I say a lot now, that Google isn't a search engine anymore, it's an answers engine. So there's usually intent behind people going to Google. They are looking for a product or service, or they are researching, or, so essentially you put a question into Google, it gives you an answer. If you don't quite like the answer, you ask it a different way, or you may try multiple reasons, right?
Yeah, that's true. Because look, you don't go to Google to pass the time, right? I think that's the key point. And I think with social media, a lot of that is, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, during your coffee breaks, whatever it is, that's where people are on social, browsing through, they're not really on there for a very specific reason as such. But with Google, you go there for a reason. And I think you're right. It's that kind of intent-based, objective as to why you're engaging with that platform that makes so much difference in terms of that. And those numbers are interesting. So, you're talking 160 versus sort of 70 billion.
70, yeah.
Obviously both those numbers are kind of very, very kind of significant in terms of actual value, but the fact that Google is still generating 2.5 times as much revenue as Facebook with all of its different platforms and assets, I think says a lot, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and we still see, I think that's it, going back to that kind of what's popular or what's fashionable. As much as the conversations lean towards some social sometimes, because it's quite fun, it's quite sexy, it's kind of one of those new interesting platforms. The fact is that from a business perspective, Google is still, the heart of your activity, and should be treated as such. And as you mentioned there's an intent. So, every single one of you guys watching at the moment, at some point, probably in the last 24 hours, have Googled something, right? Now it may be, something as simple as, okay, what time is this shop open, or where can I buy X, where can I get back to school bags or stationery, whatever. But you're still going there for a reason, and I think that's important to remember and understand that you've got a captive audience at that point. So essentially, you've got that captive audience that could potentially be looking for your product, your service, your brand, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's it. And if you kind of want to underline kind of Google's main objective today, it's just to make sure that they're delivering that best quality result to whatever that search is, right? And again, like you said, I think the answers engine point is really valid, and it's something I use a lot as well. Yeah. People go to Google because they've got a question, right? They're looking for something, they're searching for something. Google's job is to provide the answer, right? And that's it. As long as you think about it in those very basic terms, I think you start to understand the importance of Google. And it's not just, people aren't just looking for products and services when they go on Google. Obviously, I think Google's, the number one kind of diagnoser of medical conditions in the world, right? In that respect as well. There's all sorts of reasons why people go on, but again, they're searching for, brilliant. So we've just had a message saying someone's going to steal the answers engine piece. Go for it.
There might be a few other phrases that we come up today with that you might want to steal as well.
Yeah, exactly. We'll send you a list. But no, it's perfect. But it makes total sense, right? And I think that's a key point to all of this. I think the other thing, Andrew, and I think again, it's if I'm asked, should I be investing my time and money on social? Should I be investing it in a search strategy? I think one of the things that I always say is, look, essentially when you're working on a Google strategy, what you're working on fundamentally is your own personal asset, which is your website, right? It's your website that you want to kind of list and get ranking on Google. Yeah. And that's not the case with social, right, Andrew?
No, I mean, I think the thing is that, as you mentioned there, you're essentially, because Google, what it wants to do is it wants to point you over to this website or that website or this website for that information. Is driving traffic. The challenge, I guess, with the social perspective is that you don't own that space. I mean, I had a case literally last Friday of a woman that rang me kind of distraught that her Instagram account had been deleted. And she'd been trying for weeks to claw it back. She had the followers, it was the main driver of her business. And she was getting stonewalled, right, by Instagram. And she'd gone through the proper processes and stuff, and was basically saying, can you help? And we're like, well, you've gone through the steps, you've gone through the process. That's all you can do. So at that point, there's a lot of time, effort, energy that goes into creating. And it's not to say social isn't important. It's incredibly important. It can be a great driver of business. We've seen it with clients, but it shouldn't be something that you kind of hang all of your clothes on, right? As far as that. So there is a challenge because you are not in control of that environment. So as much as you may want to build up, you've seen it firsthand. I think even to jump across to a different social platform like YouTube, famously Joe Rogan has moved away from the platform and moved into Spotify, where he has more control over his content, because YouTube at any point used to pull his shows, remove his revenue generator from the back of it, cancel shows, cancel his account. So you're beholden to them, right? Whereas obviously ultimately the number one asset you have, which you should have control of. That doesn't mean that some people don't have control of their domain and hosting, but they should have control of that. But obviously it's your asset to grow, to nurture. Treat it as kind of a house that you've purchased as opposed to rented.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of important points. So look, firstly, I think that asset point is hugely important. I think the second part of that is that you're potentially always at the mercy of the social algorithms, I guess, right? In some respects, and not just the algorithms, but obviously, they can, like you said, they can pull your accounts. They can delete your accounts. Google, for all intents and purposes, can never delete your website, right? What they can do is perhaps, if you really annoy them, they can perhaps stop showing your website within its search listings. Yeah. But again, that's typically recoverable, right? But with your social media platforms, if they delete your account, then potentially whatever you've been building up, no matter how much money you've spent building that up, how much time or effort you've invested, you can lose that literally overnight through no fault of your own. And I think that's hugely important.
Yeah, and you mentioned the algorithm, and I still remember being at the Social Media Marketing World Conference in San Diego a few years ago, and there was a woman at the time, Mari Smith, she's great from a Facebook perspective. You should look her up. She now works for them actually, but basically they were talking at the time where the algorithm had changed, right? So the kind of Facebook algorithm had changed, and businesses were kind of invisible overnight. So where they would put out some content on their social platforms, and perhaps get 100,000, 200,000 views, comments, engaged, shared, it kind of dropped off a cliff. And we saw something similar where they changed the Instagram algorithm from kind of chronological posting to engagement and interactive. Similarly, people lost kind of large amount of following, large amount of visibility. So you are beholden to these platforms, and then you're kind of moved into an environment as well where, in order to be visible, you need to invest in the platform. So it's and the spin is obviously, look, we want to make it more relevant, we want to make sure you hit the right audience, but essentially it's revenue generation, right? For kind of Facebook, Instagram, Snap, etc.
Yeah, exactly. And if we look at it from a Google perspective, they're not saying they don't want to make money, and they have. Their model's very simple.
Yeah.
So there's always adverts, and they're marked as ads at the top of the search engine results page. But essentially, what's below that is, I guess, it's Google's equation of what is the best possible answer to a question that's being asked, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where that difference is between sort of social and social media algorithms, is that actually from a Google perspective, they still continue to deliver immense amounts of value back. And I think because their focus is much more, okay, look, if we're driving the right level of user experience, if we're delivering the best possible answers to anyone's search queries, they're going to keep using us, right? And I think Google's biggest fear potentially is that someone continues to get the wrong types of answers back, and move over to Bing, and Bing have slowly been sort of taking some market share, and if you look at those numbers, I mean, if you're generating $160 billion in revenue and you lose 1% market share, that's significant, right? So so Google are very vested in terms of, okay, we've got to deliver those right results, and I think their focus is as well as obviously generating revenue through those sponsored ads. And obviously through YouTube as well.
But like you said, I mean, it kind of goes back to that usage piece, Amit, right? So the fact is that, Facebook have come out, for example, and said, from a user experience, and Mark Zuckerberg said it, I want our users to see more friends and family, more groups, right? I want them to do this. I want them to see this. Basically potentially harming the business relationship, because businesses are using that platform to advertise their products and services. Whereas Google, again, they actively want to drive people to a business, because again, the intent is, and guess what? I go on Google to find something. I go on Facebook, potentially, what do I go on there for? I don't go on Facebook to look for businesses. I don't go on there to look at ads, right? It's intrusive. Whereas it's understood in a Google environment, I'm going there for a particular purpose, right? As you said, back at the top, I'm not browsing. You and I are not going to sit on Google for 30 minutes and just search things. That's right. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Cool. So look, I think let's move on a bit. I think, when we're talking about, search and again, back to the kind of topic of the show, I think let's touch on SEO, Andrew, in terms of, what role does SEO play with all of this? Why is it important? What's that kind of process? And again, let's not try and bore everyone, but let's try and summarize this in a few minutes. But yeah, I mean, what role does SEO really kind of play in all of this, Andrew?
Yeah, well, I guess obviously, I mean, we probably want to frame it as well. So the traditional kind of search engine optimization, and that's obviously our phrase that we've coined is search engine ownership, something actually a term that you came up with some months back. But I guess, traditionally it's based on keywords. So, okay, I've got X number of keywords that I want to rank for. That might be, hotel on the palm. It might be, aluminium coatings, whatever the case may be. A certain number of keywords that when I type it into Google, I essentially, I appear on first page, right? That kind of space. But then also, just affecting my positioning in that search as well. So if I'm on page 10 or page 11, which nobody's ever going to click through to, what is that? So essentially driving organic traffic, you know, that's kind of it. And then potentially, I guess, you know, business inquiries, lead generation, you know, and perhaps from an e-com perspective, looking to potentially generate conversions as well online to kind of match some of that revenue. But I mean, I think that's pretty much what's been offered from an SEO perspective, probably for the last 10 years. I mean, really, that's the kind of you know, like it hasn't moved much, right?
Yeah, I think there's some reasons, you know, that I believe why that is, right? And the first I think is, again, SEO isn't as sexy as social media. Okay,
Yeah.
So you know, we're looking at these numbers and we're saying, I mean, look, let's look at it from a numbers perspective and let's look at it from a proportion perspective, right? If we look at a company's budget in terms of where they're going to spend their money, knowing now that we know that Google generate 2.5 times as much revenue as Facebook do, okay? But if a client's typically got $100 to spend, right? I would almost say that they would spend perhaps maybe 70 to 80 of those dollars on social media and perhaps 20 of those dollars on SEO, right? It's one of those services. And I kind of, you know, it's a real shame because if you look at SEO has been around much longer than social media. And for me, and I always talk about it as one of the purest forms of digital marketing. And it sounds a bit fluffy, but it really is because, you know, for me, it's your, you know, it almost integrates all of that sort of content piece. It integrates strategy, it integrates data, user behavior, user analytics. All of these things sort of encompass what SEO is. But if you look at it today, like I said, I mean, like, you know, and again, you speak to many more sort of customers or clients than I do. But would you agree that kind of 80-20 split is there where people are like much more focused on, you know, the pretty visual social media activity versus the, you know, mechanical
and
SEO activity?
Yeah, and also, you know, even if it's a Google conversation, it's Google AdWords, right? Because I think a lot of people, you know, like immediacy. They like to visualize their results or they like to visualize their ROI as well. And I think one of the challenges, not being sexy, but also almost being like dark arts, right? The smoke and mirrors world of SEO. Listen, I'm going to start a program with you and you're going to see zero impact for 3 months. What? What do you mean? I don't get to see anything. Well, you'll see kind of movement and we'll share this, but you won't actually see anything. You know, and that sometimes is a challenge, right? When they're trying to allocate budgets, if I can't feel, touch, see, it's not tangible, right? So I think that's also another challenge that kind of presents themselves because traditionally SEO has been positioned as it's keywords, it's this, it might do this, it might do that. It's not been positioned properly, and the true value of it hasn't been really explored.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully we'll kind of change some mindsets today when it comes to that. But look, I think one of the challenges again with that and with that traditional approach, and again, I'll relate it back to personal experiences, is we've been in those meetings, Andrew, when we've presented, you know, that traditional SEO form, right? Yeah. Where, you know, that traditional SEO report as such. And we've gone in there, we've got important stakeholders in the room. And the first thing we do is say, hey, here's where your website is now ranking based on these 15 or 20 search keywords, which we all agreed a few months back. And hey, guess what? Your position #1 here, your page #1 there, your top 5 here. Yeah. And they're looking at it going, awesome. You know, this is really cool. Yeah. You know, and the other thing we might say is, look, here's the organic traffic. And, you know, 3 months ago, this is what you're getting. And today, this is what you're getting. And again, they're like, awesome. And then the last thing that they might turn around and say is, okay, cool. How many leads have we generated? Like what you said earlier. Yeah. And we'd say, right, you've generated X number of leads. And I guess that would be it. And yeah, it was, you know, when I was presenting those, and I don't know how you felt, but when I was presenting those kinds of reports, I'd always walk out of the room with some level of satisfaction. Okay, that cool, we're doing what the clients paid us to do. Yeah. But I always had a sneaky feeling that actually when that CEO walks out of the same room, he's thinking, right, when's my next meeting? He's not thinking about, okay, this is phenomenal and this is going to change our business. Yeah. Do you get what I mean? It's like, you know, it's almost like, okay, we're ticking some boxes here, which is great. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But actually, they're not really able to kind of draw a straight line and visualize the impact of this SEO work here. Exactly. And actually how it relates to their business, right? It's not stuff that they're going to, you know, perhaps if they're having a drink with a friend a few hours later that they're going to go back and say, I had the most phenomenal SEO meeting today.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. And that
No.
kind of troubled me, because look, we've been going 15 years. So sustainability is literally
Key.
something I obsess about, right?
Yeah.
And for me, that just meant that what was being offered here wasn't sustainable. But the challenge is, because every agency in the market is selling based on the same deliverables, service offering, reporting structures.
Globally.
This is what,
forget even
globally.
Globally.
Right, exactly. Even I'll touch on that in a second. But yeah, even right now, that's exactly what it is, right? We get when we get an SEO RFP or a briefing from a client, it's always, we've got 20 keywords and basically we need to rank number one for these, and send us your best offer. And you look at it right now and say, well, actually, is that it? You're talking about, for your entire business, 20 keywords is everything. And it can't be. It just, and especially today, when we look at Google Trends, more people are searching for longer form searches than they ever have done. I think back in the day, we might have searched for, to go back to your hotel reference, we might have searched for hotel in Dubai, right?
Yeah.
We sure as hell ain't doing that today. We're going to be searching for, right, luxury beach resort on the Palm, centrally located on a palm, or whatever it is, right? But we're talking about now 10, 12 words as opposed to 3 or 4 words. And so when people say, exactly. So when people are now saying, hey, it's 15 keywords, 20 keywords, I think the challenge that we face today is that we're saying, look, guys, you're looking at it in the wrong way. And it goes back to, what does that CEO feel is important, right?
Yeah.
As weird as it sounds, I would love for a CEO to be in bed at night thinking about, right, this is, what these guys are doing from an SEO perspective, and what we're doing as a company from an SEO perspective is going to change and liberate how we kind of do things moving forward. But we're just not, it's just, and I think that's because that's not happening, is why the industry suffered, right?
Yeah.
And social media is taking over.
I think you're the only CEO that's thinking that, to be fair.
I can't even deny it.
I know.
I literally can't deny that, but it's fine. We move on.
So I didn't mean to throw you.
No, I know. But look, the thing is, you get my point, right? This is,
exactly.
This is, and it's broken an industry, I think, because, this is something where basically, this industry really should have evolved now, and companies should be investing, hundreds of thousands per year instead of maybe hundreds, right? Which is kind of where it's at right now. Yeah.
Yeah. It's still very much treated as a tick box. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tick box because the belief is that nothing's moved on. It's the same. Everything has remained the same. So it's kind of tick, right? Tick. But actually, to be fair, even social's evolved. Social media originally was, I need Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn and Twitter. It was like, and I want to post everything. It was almost like, someone's been given a list and it kind of marks off. Everything else has kind of progressed. Whereas still SEO is locked in that I need 15 keywords. I've got this much budget and I'm done. Thanks very much. Right.
Right. And that's it. So cool. So let's change that. I think, when we, so when I obsess about this at night, one of the things that I was kind of really thinking about was, the only way that we can change mindset, the only way that we can explain the importance of search engine marketing or search engine optimization, as we were still sort of calling it back then, was we've got to change the metrics, right? And I think, we touched on those metrics before. So there's traditional metrics was, were very much based on keywords, where those keywords are ranking, how much organic traffic was generated, and maybe how much leads or revenue from an e-commerce perspective was generated. But actually, when we started kind of really looking at this, we thought, hold on, that's still, those metrics are never going to excite that CEO, right?
Yeah.
But what potentially will excite a CEO, and if we really kind of break down, why would somebody engage in SEO? I guess the first thing is they would want to know how visible they are, or how visible their company is, right, on the search engines.
Exactly.
I think one step above that is, okay, well, if we're visible, how visible are we in comparison to our competitors?
Yeah.
Right? Because actually, if I'm visible, I want to be more visible than those guys, right? Because especially my main competitors.
Yeah.
Now that for me starts to kind of change that mindset a little bit, where a CEO will be like, hey, do you know what? We're this visible and our next competitor is only this visible. You know, that is perhaps a story that you'd share over a drink. And I think the third piece of this, which I felt was almost like the final piece of the jigsaw, was, okay, well, if we're visible and we're more visible than our competitors, well, what's the actual value of that visibility, right? So, and I guess in this kind of the search engine world, the best way of describing or explaining that is, if you had zero visibility today, how much would it cost you, right? So how much would it cost you in, say, Google AdWords spend, because that's essentially your option, okay? How much would it cost you in Google AdWords spend to be as visible as you are now, right? To generate that same visibility, to generate that same number of clicks. And I think when we started looking at that, we felt this became super interesting, right? Because now all of a sudden, this is stuff people care about, right? It's what, you know, and obviously we've spoken to a lot of business owners and a lot of leaders who now, when you explain this approach to them, their eyes open up. Okay, and now they're intrigued. Now they're asking the right questions, right? And now it's not necessarily about, you know, what position they're at or you know, that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, actually these things are important. So I guess to take it on a step, we've defined these as essentially those three items. So the first metric that we now look at today is search visibility, and I'll define search visibility as well. So search visibility is essentially, you know, the probability of clicks, or the likelihood that somebody will click onto your website based on a search term, but not just for one search term, but for all the search terms related to your business. And that's a little bit sort of complicated, but basically what we're saying is, this isn't about 15 keywords or 20 keywords or phrases. This is basically every single keyword that's associated to your business. And we want to know how visible you are within that, okay? And based on that visibility, how likely is someone to click through to your website? And that we've managed to figure out an equation based on actual numbers, which tells us that, hey, based on, and we can talk about the Nexa scenario, we'll come back to Nexa a bit later. But when we first worked this out for ourselves, I think based on about 400 keywords, I think we had a visibility of about 50%, which basically meant for those 400 search terms, 50% of those are likely to convert into traffic, right? And so that gave us a bit of a benchmark. And then the next part of this is basically what that search visibility is in comparison to your competitors. So we do the same metric with all of our competitors. We don't have to go to them for data. Google tells us all of this when we're just conducting a search. So we're basically, you know, putting all of this data together to work out how visible we are, and then how visible our competitors are. And then that final piece is going into AdWords, understanding what our average search value is, or the cost per click is for any of the searches related to our business. And then, and again, I think back then we worked it out as about $6.50 a click, which today is about $7.20 per click, which is basically how much we'd have to spend
to get the same traffic,
right? Yeah. So that was, I mean, so I think actually when we came up with that, when we started sort of discussing these real kind of, I'd say, more important business metrics, we weren't discounting things like organic traffic or lead generation, absolutely not.
No.
But what we were doing is focusing on the fact that we've now got actual measurable metrics, which are quite important, right?
And it actually start to make sense, because you're starting to pull back the curtain at that point, right? For the whole Wizard of Oz analogy, I mean, you're getting behind the curtain. You're starting to actually see something that is meaningful, as you said, you know, that sparks the interest of a CEO or a business owner, in real terms that make sense, and actually have some value on it, and then ultimately can be built on as well, right? As opposed to just, well, I've got another 5 keywords I want to rank for, right? It's irrelevant at that point. So this obviously methodology and process just allows you to kind of go after the right type of traffic, and then also, more importantly, allow you to measure that against your competitors, as you said. You know, how much of that visibility do I have? How much is that visibility? So what is, you know, how big is that pie, as it were? Right. So yeah, and then also by acquainting it to an actual monetary value, this becomes valuable. So I think that's the other challenge before, well, what does it mean if I increase my organic traffic? We know that organic traffic has a higher conversion rate than paid traffic. We also know that Google are working super hard to not differentiate between the two, right? So over the years, it used to be really obvious what was a paid ad and what was organic. Now you're at a point, frankly, on a mobile that you wouldn't even know, and a lot of users don't know, right? We hear that a lot with businesses that are like, well, why is this guy always number one? What's he doing that I'm not? Well, he's spending money on Google. Oh, okay, well, hold on a minute. But so I think the thing is that as this has evolved, this is something that has to be considered.
Yeah, and let's go back to that value piece again. So, guys, what we've done is we've looked at the numbers and nothing else here. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we know that we're driving, I don't know, 10,000 clicks through organic, right, onto a website, and if we know that the average cost per click for that company would be about $5, essentially what we're showing is that there's $50,000 worth of traffic that's being driven to the website organically, which is free, which would otherwise have to be paid for, right? So now we've actually got a real business value that's related to all of this activity. And actually for me, that was that missing piece, okay? Yeah. Because you couldn't sit there in a meeting previously where somebody would say, hey, great, you guys have done this, what's my ROI? Or what's all this worth? And I think with this methodology, because we're now looking at that visibility piece, we're looking across pretty much every single keyword that's relative to a client, we can now associate it with a very real dollar value. And I think this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because hey, look, now if I went into a meeting, and it's been a long time since I presented an SEO report, but if I went into one, it would be a case of, right, last month the traffic that we generated for you was worth $50,000, right? Let's just start there, okay? And by the way, you're only paying 10, right? And do you get what I mean? All of a sudden, this now becomes okay, somebody's made the right decision. We're doing something cool. This becomes interesting because everyone understands, the language of money.
Yeah, and look, there is also as well the consideration of the shift in mindset. So as you start to prove value associated to this traffic and you attach a number to it, there's a thought process that kicks in, and to the point where if I switch off Google AdWords, my traffic drops. Okay. So I'd stop doing Google AdWords. I stopped paying for traffic. Literally, it's instantaneous, right? That moment drops. With this approach and the focus on organic and visibility around that, this is continued effort over a period of time. Now, I think there's another phrase, I think somebody, pinched the phrase earlier on, the answers engine is another one for you. So we look at it as kind of compound marketing, and this is the phrase that you came up with as well, Amit, right? So the effort that you're putting in is continued to increase over a period of time, right? By not putting any kind of, paying Google any more money, your visibility, and we can show that actually, when we start talking about Nexa, your visibility increases, thus kind of producing this compound marketing effect.
Yeah, and it's funny actually. We came up with that a long time ago because we saw very early on in our search engine ownership days that actually there was a compounding effect of all of our activity. You
built out I just remembered, I'd forgotten about this. You built out the matrix on the Excel sheet where you actually started to track value of traffic, if you remember.
Yes, I did.
I forgot about that.
No, so did I. Thanks for bringing that up. But yeah, that was actually really cool. I did, and it worked. We tested that out with numerous clients.
Exactly.
Yeah. So actually, look, we've spoken about Nexa, and I'm getting conscious of time. I mean, I think it'd be good to kind of maybe share our story. Yeah. Do you want to start, or I mean?
I think I'll start as far as why share our story, and then perhaps you can dig into the numbers a bit. I think the thing is that, during this digital growth show series, we're really obviously trying to make it as real as we can, right? And by that, I mean real world experience, either clients or guests that we have on, or actually turning, the camera on us, as it were, and looking at what we've done. Now, we have started this journey many years ago, but accelerated this process during COVID as well. So like a lot of the other, I'd say, advice or tips or tricks or whatever that we've been sharing over these past weeks. Essentially, this is again something that we accelerated during the COVID process. So we'd already had a plan in place. Things started to make sense, and then COVID gave us the opportunity to really kind of dial in and essentially show the results. And we're never afraid to share or show those real world results. So yeah, I mean that's kind of how we arrived here, right?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, like I said, it started kind of many years ago in some respects.
Yeah,
exactly. I think where it became interesting is, and when I say started, what we did back then, guys, more than anything else, was we just created content, right? It was essentially blog articles, and actually what
answering
we did is
questions.
It was the Google, is an answers engine methodology that we basically took and said, look, if people are asking questions in Google, let's create the types of answers that they're looking for, right?
Yeah.
And so we went through it. It was good fun. We went back and when we first started that, we went to our sales team and said, right, guys, tell us all the questions that you guys get asked in sales meeting. And they gave us a whole list. And then what we did is we just created content for each one of those questions. Exactly. And it was cool, but it was very sporadic. It was very, it was almost when we had time, we'd do it.
When we had time,
as opposed to a real kind of strong sort of strategic effort. But I think what opened our eyes, and guys, just for context, we're talking about perhaps 6 years ago here, maybe even longer.
Yeah, it was 2014, 13, yeah.
Right. So, and what's actually started opening our eyes was perhaps not even immediately, but maybe a year and a half down the road when we started to see a surge in traffic, looked back, and actually it was those articles that was essentially driving the most traffic to our site. And not only was it kind of driving traffic to our site, but these were converting into leads. And then we started to see that these were converting into business, right? And it was interesting because all we were doing was essentially answering the questions that someone would ask in a sales meeting. And so what we're doing is we just realized very quickly that people, essentially are turning to Google perhaps before they're even speaking to a salesperson, right? If they want to know the answer to something, why ask a salesperson off the bat? Or perhaps they were even checking if what the salesperson said in a meeting was accurate, right? And again, people tend to trust what they kind of see and read, and for that perspective, I think Google proved pretty valuable. So yeah, it became interesting because I think some of those early articles, and actually I'd say out of our top 5 performing articles today, 4 of those were written in 2014, 2015.
Yeah.
Which is that compounding effect. And actually, even today we've got a lot more traffic come to the website than we did back then, but there's been that compounding effect.
Exactly.
Sorry. So something that we spent perhaps an hour or 2 hours writing 5 years ago, they still drive, say, 500 people to the website every month. And that's where that sort of compounding sort of point comes in.
Yeah.
But yeah, so from that journey perspective, again, I'd say, like Andrew said, we've been creating content over the years, but it was really only COVID. And again, it came down to, quite a lot of clients putting contracts on hold and us finding time again, I think more than anything else. And it was time across the board, which is what it was, where we said, okay, well, let's actually create content while we're kind of sitting idle. Let's see what happens. And it's been absolutely phenomenal in the sense that it's allowed us to solidify the search engine ownership piece. But our traffic in the last, say, 3 or 4 months has trebled. And again, it's probably likely to double in the next couple of months. From our own search engine visibility piece, when we really started to understand how accurate this was, we went from that sort of mid-50s to mid-60s up to 73% visibility.
Well, that would have been desktop. In the video. So when we created a small video too, which we were going to play for you guys, but we'll send kind of out to you. But that at that point, it was obviously animation to explain search engine ownership. Yeah, we should have said at the beginning, if you don't want to listen to the whole digital growth show for an hour, you can watch a 1.5-minute video.
Yeah, exactly.
But basically on that, we were 73.2% or 73.4 visibility at that point, and that was 3 months ago. I want to say 3 months ago.
That was about 3 months ago, and then and then like all kind of expensive, high quality videos that we produce, it was out of date in about 2 weeks because the next report came out. And we jumped from, so actually, so let's break the numbers down. 73% visibility. So that basically means across about 400 search terms, if people were typing those 400 search terms, we would get about 73% of any traffic that was generated on the back of that, which was huge. I mean, that's, for me, I was actually quite happy with that. Our next competitor, again, when we did the competitive analysis, was about 33%. And so, you know, a big advantage. And the fact that actually a lot of our ranks were at position, say 1 and 2, essentially means we get a higher click-through rate than some of those competitors, even if they're visible on the same search terms. So that's why you end up with that kind of huge differential there. So we checked again about a month later. 73% has now turned into, and sorry, let me go back to so the value of that traffic, I think at that point was about $56,000.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that was a shock.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I mean, that was a huge shock.
Yeah. And I think when we were kind of guesstimating this prior to that, in my head, I had it somewhere in a region of $40,000 to $50,000 a month, which was still high. And then when the actual numbers came out and it was accurate to the dollar, and it was about $53,000 or $56,000 or whatever it was. I mean, that was fantastic because it essentially underlined what we were doing, right?
Yeah. So I think we should highlight it again. So that $53,000 is essentially what you would have to spend. So let's say someone decided to start an agency, you know, and they wanted to get the volume of traffic and the visibility on search terms that we had, they'd have to write a check for that amount of money, right? To Google to get that amount. And that was quite staggering, I think.
Yeah, because you've been talking over 600K a year and you're thinking, oh, well, that's super interesting because potentially we're now creating a bit of a huge advantage over competitors because even our next best ranking competitor, well, actually they've got to spend some money to get the same traffic.
Exactly.
Us. Yeah. Right? But this is what we saw. I mean, we said, okay, well, actually now this is a real business metric that makes a whole lot of sense, right? Because all of a sudden, you know, again, someone who kind of lives, sleeps, and breathes this kind of stuff, this became even more exciting, you know, because now I can associate with a dollar value. And again, the following month, I think was eye-opening again because we'd now gone from 73 to 78%, extra 5% increase in search visibility. Our value had increased by another $5,000. So again, overnight, over a period of those 30 days. Yeah, you know, we were now up to say $720,000 a year in actual search value. Okay, again, what somebody would have to spend to get the same visibility as us. And then I think I got the results actually yesterday, and timing was perfect. But again, it was absolutely mind blowing because our search visibility in the last month has gone from 78% through to 88% across mobile and desktop devices. And the value today is about $80,100 per year. So that's a huge increase even in a 3-month period. But over that time, what we've obviously done, and any of you guys who follow us on social, on LinkedIn or subscribe to our blog, you'll know exactly why, right? We've just accelerated hard on the content creation piece, and we're now publishing upwards of 60 to 80 articles a month. And the impact of that is there and continues to sort of grow. But you asked me a question the other day, Andrew, and I felt it was really interesting because you're saying, cool, so great, we're now, you know, up to close to $1 million, $960,000 in search value. What does that really mean? What's our real ROI, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, and I think that point becomes interesting because this isn't just about traffic that's coming to your website. But obviously, if people are coming to your website, and if in essence we're spending, say, you know, $1 million a year, which we're not because it's free traffic for us. Yeah. Actually, how much of that traffic converts into a lead, and how many of those leads then convert into business? Because then, if we're looking at asset value, we need to look at all of that, right? We can't just look at the number of clicks and say, hey. No. here's $1 million worth of clicks, therefore the business or our SEO is worth X. Actually, you know, and we work on a metric because it's an expensive, highly competitive industry that we're in. You know, we kind of relate some of our ROI spend to maybe, you know, a 1-to-4 ratio, right?
Yeah.
So essentially, if we then look at it from that perspective and say, okay, well, if all of those leads come in and the value of our spend is, say, $1 million, we should be expecting a minimum of $4 million back in sales, right? Well, now what's the value of our SEO? Because it's not $1 million, it's significantly higher. Right?
Exactly.
And for me, that just kind of underlines that whole search engine ownership piece, because we're, you know, again, 400 sort of keywords, we're so visible that 88% of those searches on those keywords are going to translate into traffic. And, you know, potentially for us right now, we're looking at, you know, just that one small piece of marketing that we do, generating about $4 million in revenue. And I think that becomes exciting. I think if I go back to that boardroom where I'm presenting an SEO report and I'm showing these metrics, you know, that's a completely different ballgame. And I guess this is what we're trying to instill into everyone today, right? Ask for the right questions and look at the right metrics.
And that's tangible. So when you can start drawing lines to things, and when you can start to understand again, and I think, you know, it's not, we should probably say at this point, it's not just as simple as creating content. Okay. So it's not obviously that's a key component. There's also the fact that we're kind of leveraging social. We've got some social signals in there that Google is also picking up on. You know, we're producing good quality content that's answering the right questions. There's a whole host of other activities associated to this, but I almost feel like search engine ownership, it's more understandable, right? To kind of the average person, right? So you don't need to be you don't need to kind of understand the technical ins and outs as far as seeing a direct impact, because ultimately the impact is financial, and everyone understands that, right? It doesn't matter who you are in the organization, everyone understands the financial impact and implication of doing this. So I think that, you know, with this, what we want to do is we want to start changing that thought process. So if you do have money, you need to invest in this. It's not a tick box anymore. I've only got a certain amount of money. Okay, fine. If you want to spend it, you need to spend it here. And is it sexy? It's a little bit sexier because the content's cool, right? But it's not about that. It's about actually kind of, you know, generating, as you mentioned, not just qualified traffic, because thanks very much. It's about looking at that conversion metric and understanding how that traffic directly correlates to closed business.
Yeah, and I think one more point. I think, you know, you mentioned earlier that so much, if you're spending money on social, then you're spending, it's a one-time hit, right? There's no sustainability. There's, you know, it's gone, right? It's that firework.
That's
right. You know, like you mentioned. With this approach, if we stopped our activity today and said, right, no more kind of, you know, SEO, search engine ownership activity, we're not going to do anymore. Guess what? We're still going to generate at least, I would say, $70,000 to $75,000 worth a month of traffic. I would say possibly for the next 6 months without even, you know, and I'd put money on that, and I'd put money because I know how it works, right? And so we're talking about a hugely sustainable piece of marketing, which will literally pay for itself again and again and again and again, right? Exactly. And I think that's important. Again, going back to being one of the purest forms of digital marketing, that's why.
Yeah, 100%. Anything that again, it's not a tap at that point. It just continues to give you value. So and also look, even so, we touched upon this real early on about search algorithms and algorithms across social. Even with the changes in search algorithm that we've seen across Google, because they are continually kind of tweaking their algorithms, we've still seen sustainable growth, right? Yeah. So it's not, we haven't been impacted as a lot of other, we can see a lot of other clients that have been impacted, not our clients, sorry, from competitors and competitive clients that have been affected by changes in the algorithm, because they kind of, they're doing the same old activity, right? Yeah. It's as simple as that. So I think, you know, we've always pride ourselves on the fact that we looked for new opportunities, new ways of doing things, and this has proved valuable.
Yeah, just to go back, I mean, but the reason is because we're helping Google. So the approach is helping Google,
100%.
right? It's providing answers to the questions that people are asking. It's basically we're trying to help Google to do their job better, right? So why, and that's why we're never penalized with any algorithm updates, right? Those algorithm updates from Google, when they do 300 of them a year, why they do those updates is because they catch people trying to manipulate the system. And actually, there's no manipulation here. We're not gaming them. We're not manipulating any algorithm flaws. We're basically saying, hey, your job is to basically show the best quality results. We're going to help you do that by providing you really good answers.
Best quality content.
And it's so simple, right? That's why we're like, look, we have to demystify all of this, nonsensical rubbish that gets spouted by other people. It's not about the keyword. It's guys, just create content, right? Like if you do it, you do it in the right way, do it strategically, then honestly, life becomes super interesting.
Yeah, exactly. 100%.
Yeah. Guys, we're going to wrap up in literally the next few minutes. And Andrew, I'm going to attempt to play that video again. But basically, if you have got any questions, please send them through, right? So we've had a few kind of comments, and thanks Riot, thanks Will, thanks Paul. Some really kind of nice comments. But again, if you guys have got any questions, all of the data that we've shared with you today, actually, we're more than happy to share with you or run through with you so you can understand exactly how it works. Always happy to do that. And
also, obviously, I mean, as we've mentioned, we didn't mention at the top of the show, we're happy to connect with anyone. So find us on LinkedIn, drop us a connection, and kind of give us a shout. Happy to jump on a Zoom with anyone or grab a coffee just to kind of run through this metrics as well. It is very, I'd say, obviously, it's a bold move in the sense that we're going out there and talking about search engine ownership. I think I did do a post last week on LinkedIn that said SEO is dead. Long live search engine ownership. But obviously, I think as much as we're pushing the terminology out there, the actual process and activity is fairly simplistic in its approach. And the most important thing is it delivers results. So I think that's important to reference and mention.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thanks again for your comments, guys. We've got a few more that coming in. Andrew, I've really enjoyed this. Literally, I can't believe that's an hour gone. Yeah,
that's genuinely shocked me, actually. I thought that was super quick. So yeah, happy days. Just before we kind of wrap up, Amit, we launched our Digital Growth Show podcast last week. So now all of the shows are available on podcasts. They're available on Apple, on Google, on Spotify. Just search the Digital Growth Show and you'll find an amazing picture of you and me there grinning away. So please kind of subscribe to that, share that as well. We understand that we get a lot of views and a lot of people watching post webinar as well. So we do get a lot of you guys tuning in live, which we really love. But we've also got people tuning in afterwards. So by all means now, if you fancy having a listen to the podcast, do that as well, guys.
Awesome. Andrew, I'm going to play the video, but guys, just before I do that, literally it's 90 seconds, so don't rush off just yet. Thanks for joining, everyone. And Andrew, mate, I loved it. It's been great.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Amit. Good seeing you. Look forward to seeing everyone next week.
Do you measure your SEO success through keywords? Well, it's time then to redefine SEO, because at Nexa, we look at SEO differently. We ask you, do you want your website to be optimized for search engines? Or do you prefer to own the searches relevant to your business? If this makes sense to you, the next 45 seconds will change the way you look at SEO. At Nexa, we focus on 3 key parameters. 1. Your search engine visibility. 2. Your search engine visibility in comparison to your competitors. 3. Your organic traffic in value terms. Like charity, let analytics begin at home. Let's look at how we fare across these parameters. Nexa's visibility score is 75.1%, while our closest competitors is 33.7%, less than half. Against this, Nexa clocks 7,459 website visits a month, compared to 2,453 for the competitor, more than 3 times. And how do you equate that in hard cash? Given that the average cost per click for our industry is $7.20, That's $53,086 US a month, or a whopping $637,032 US a year. Money talks, and it's more eloquent with ownership rather than optimization. As for the competition, they'll end up spending more for the same visibility as us, while we can deploy that money in other areas of business and create an even bigger gap. Let's take you on this journey as we redefine SEO to search engine ownership and get you more value for your marketing investment. Nexa, a growth marketing partner.